Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Carasoft Technology would like to welcome you to our ServiceNow Federal Tech Talk, Overcoming Zero Trust Challenges in Federal Agencies. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that all lines have been muted to reduce any kind of background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer by the end of the presentation or follow up with you offline. This webinar is being recorded and a copy will be emailed to you. We are pleased to offer one continuing professional education, or CPE credit, to those that attend today's webinar. In order to qualify for the credit, you must be actively listening and watching the webinar and answering the polling questions that will be presented through the presentation so we can monitor active attendance. For more information on the CPE credits we are offering, our CPE sponsor, NASBA, and the submission process, please click the link in the chat. If you meet all of today's requirements, you will receive your certificate of completion within 2 weeks. Just tell you a little bit about Carasoft. We are a trusted government IT solutions provider supporting public sector organizations across federal, state, and local government agencies, including education and healthcare markets. At this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to our presenter from ServiceNow, Scott Flynn. Scott, the floor is all yours.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Thank you, Sarah. My name is Scott Flynn. I'm an advisory solutions consultant with ServiceNow. I support the security operations portion of the platform. My clientele is the DoD, the intelligence community, and the federal systems integrators. I'm joined by my colleagues today, Scott Havlack, who I'm partnered with in the DoD space, and Pete White, who I'm partnered with in the Fed Civ space. Our architect, Ben Prime, has helped with this presentation, and the four of us are collectively the SecOps points of contact for the federal space. And we're very pleased that you're with us today. What we're going to be covering is zero trust from the ServiceNow platform standpoint, specifically through the lens of security operations. But we will be touching on what the platform can do as a whole. So as we move forward, if you have any questions, if you need to come off mute, please do. And there'll be some polls. And I do believe we'll post the results at the end. And thank you for joining us today. I'm going to move forward. I want to start and preface our talk today with a forward-looking statement. This is the safe harbor. We may be stating things that are a bit over the horizon. So we just want to make sure that it's understood that this is an ongoing discussion and that it's still in development. Let's start by defining what zero trust is. Zero trust is essentially was put into play with Memorandum 2209 that's on the screen. And essentially what zero trust is assume breach, no implicit trust, there's continuous validation, least privileged access for users, data-centric approach, and granular access control. We're going to touch on all of those today with the basis of the platform, security operations itself, and some of the third-party integrations that drive our ability to do automation and orchestration, the analytics and visibility that it provides as well. But it's all based basically on what you see on the screen as defined in 2022. We have a deadline in 2027 to meet at least the targeted zero trust objectives in the DoD side. I do want to put out today that even though there's DoD statements on the screen here for 2027, that we are going to more broadly apply this to the CISA model as well. Me being DoD, it's more comfortable with me because my clientele like to see the framework that way. But CISA's model is just as important and is just as relevant as the DoD model is. So we're going to get into those today and show them their vernacular, how they're defined within the platform, and the way we can utilize our integrations to basically help you maintain your operations and achieve zero trust at the same time. So some of the misconceptions that are out there I'd like to touch on as it relates to zero trust is that once you achieve some zero trustness that you are now trusted. That never happens. There's no trust ever in a zero trust environment. It's just enough, just in time, and it's assumed breach, and it is an ongoing process. And it's not only about identity, which is only one pillar, it is about contextualized data. And context is exactly what ServiceNow does, and you're basically going to see that as we get in and show you these integrations that we have for you today, because we will definitely demonstrate the interface as well as these presentations. So you'll see that context. Another misconception is that Zero Trust you can buy. It's a framework. There's no particular product. And what I want to show you today, what we're going to detail, is the fact that multiple products that you utilize in your organization integrate with our tool. And that's how we're going to be able to have a connective tissue where we can fuse policy and governance, risk and vulnerability to incident handling, to assets. You're going to see the power of the ServiceNow platform to help show the framework that we provide in and of ourselves, and that it's Zero Trust is too expensive. There are many actions that can be taken at no and low cost. We have a saying in ServiceNow where we have no and low code, and we're going to show some of that as well, not only in the presentation, but hopefully within the demonstration as well. Okay, polling question number 1. Where are you in your current adoption journey of Zero Trust? I think we'll leave this up for 30 seconds. Sarah's watching the back end to determine when we slow down the response. So that's very insightful. Most of us are trying to prepare and then plan, assess, and implement. Implement is good to see. Outstanding. Outstanding. So we're all in the initial phases of this, which is very understandable. Moving forward, this is a diagram out of NIST 800-207. And really what we have here, I'll break down, is a PDP, a policy decision point here, and a policy enforcement point below it. And a policy engine driving it, policy administrators that are essentially keeping policies up to date. And this is interacting with the policy enforcement point down in the data plane. So the control plane is where policy is established, and data plane is where it's enforced. At high level, though, off to the side, we are being fed information into the middle of this control plane, data plane module, if you will, the logical components. Continuous diagnostics and mitigation systems, industry compliance, threat intelligence, logging, data access policy, PKI, ID management, SEM systems. These are basically feeding this engine. These arrows are only in one direction, though. We'll show you how we have our take on that. Other references out of DoD, this was readily available for us to try to illustrate basically conventional versus Zero Trust. We're moving away from data as it's been for the decades it's been instantiated. Perimeter defense systems are what's being replaced with centralization of Zero Trust, where essentially we are decentralizing and deperimetering data, perimetering data, if that's a word. Data is the new perimeter because we're encrypted in motion, we're encrypted at rest, we're constantly challenging whether or not we're authorized to even access that data or be on the network. It's essentially going to make data able to defend itself by having an infrastructure able to do Zero Trust at all stages and all pillars. And in that, moving forward into the future, the way the DoD has basically stated it here, they want to get out of the silos with the conventional methodology of the way data is being processed right now. They basically are indicating that we're going toward orchestration. Moving forward, we're going to need the ability to have policy that can see all the way across the organization that's interconnected, that can also be policy-based, but as well as enforcement-based, centralized enforcement-based. And the way the DoD envisioned it was essentially having different points of orchestration in different environments. Essentially, what's going on in the middle here in the purple is where all data is coming back in where the policy decisions and the policy enforcements are basically instantiated. And we have SOAR, robotic process automation, AI, machine learning, SEM and SOAR, analytics, behavior scoring. These are very important for how we're able to monitor what is occurring, either in real time or temporally over time. And then the ability to not only see it, but to rate it and score it and risk calculate and determine its behavior. That all feeds into visualization, of course. And the analytics are also being fed from on-iron virtualization, cloud environments. The sensors on the outside here are essentially the ability to send and receive information down into where the policy enforcement points reside in the different services. And in that, the way I see that is it's more integrations because as they show in the last slide that I'll show here, the policy enforcement points are ultimately where you're going to get down into the data plane and ultimately security operations, which is not the only solution that ServiceNow feels is applicable to meet the zero trust architecture. Security operations is what can do the policy enforcement points through integrations. And that's what we'll be showing you here as we move forward. Why are we not doing ZTA already? We're still preparing because I think honestly, this is a daunting task. All of us are still wrapping our arms around. As we saw in the poll there, we're still preparing. It's hard to understand necessarily where we're starting, determining the level of complexity. It's a bit uncertain. Legacy systems may not even be capable of necessarily performing 21st century functions in the way that we may potentially think zero trust would require. And on that note, I challenge the audience to ask yourselves how much of your processes you're aware of now of zero trust that are 100% manual that you think you could hybridize to be manual and potentially somewhat automated, and ultimately moving toward advanced stages of DoD zero trust implementation where it is fully automated. That's where the legacy systems questions tend to come up is some organizations don't feel their systems can support zero trust. We're gonna detail how some of that also plays out in security operations as well. Also, their staff size, skill set, the duration of time to consider for this implementation, and of course, funding. No bucks, no buck Rogers, but things that are open-ended are hard to budget. Pardon me, especially from a skill set standpoint to plan for. I put in down there a matrix that's followed me through my career that has helped me properly implement change. And I put that up there as something notional I think might be a benefit to avoid how to avoid confusion, anxiety, resistance, and frustration and false starts. Those facets of information and team building and just insight need to be there. So I thought I'd throw that in there, that I always had better change when I had vision, skills, incentive, resources all aligned and everybody was aware. So with that, polling question number 2. Which of the following is your highest priority assessed? Current zero trust gap. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. We're simply interested in understanding where you are in your gaps because ServiceNow's platform has the ability to do, like I stated earlier, fuse policy to governance, to risk, to vulnerability, to incident handling, case management, assets, HR, no code, low code with App Engine. The ServiceNow platform basically applies, technologically at least, to the first 3. Funding and staffing would be internal. We're very interested to understand what your input is on question 2, because it plays into the rest of the presentation and the demonstration. Interesting. Legacy lack of integrated systems is tied with funding. Automation and orchestration. Okay, not a gap there. That's great to see. Interesting. Okay. We are trying to loosely put the polling questions in line with this presentation to try to draw this all together here. Because essentially, as I've stated several times, ServiceNow believes that an integrated program across your people, processes, and technology ecosystem is really the answer. And as I stated earlier, we don't want to focus on DoD. We want to just state outright the fact that Zero Trust itself, the pillars, they're common through both, so we're addressing them commonly at high level through both. Um, there's also one more if anybody's in the TS world. There's another intelligence community mapping here that we're also aware of. We'd be happy to talk about that offline, but ultimately we're driving toward that. Hopefully this picture is starting to change the way it looks. Because ultimately what I saw the first time I saw this picture was actually the platform that is ServiceNow. Because the arrows that we're pointing inward are ultimately our integrations that I was talking about, were the sensors at the bottom there that ultimately became the policy enforcement points. As 800-202 specified, that really what they're talking about, I honestly think, is a platform that fuses all these technologies together. On the screen here is our beloved football slide. And everything in yellow around the outside just so happens to be the modules that are in play through the Zero Trust discussion, and definitely things that we can workflow between all of these modules. So just very briefly, IT security operations down here in the bottom right-hand corner is where I'm coming from with my other three colleagues. This is what we support. But HR is on the platform as well. A use case there would be removing user rights potentially if they are not keeping up with their training, terminations, the sundry of information on personnel into the platform is very much at play, and we can workflow that, even automate workflows based on that. Integrated risk management is a very tightly integrated solution for security operations from the standpoint of continuous monitoring, ATOs, and the ability to state the controls and the security objectives of your environment. That is coupled and calculated and analytically demonstrated and workflowed from a risk management standpoint with vulnerability management. So we workflow beautifully between these two modules already. IT asset management, we have the insight that is ultimately fed into the configuration management database, which is the context that I talked about earlier about contextualized data. It's not just security operations. We're gleaning information contextually from every module you see on here, not just the yellow ones, of course, but the context provided by them, especially in the case of asset management. We can overlay assets into our cases and vulnerability management in the security operations module. And I'll show this where we can have insight down into the module, down into the hardware components and the software components that they're comprised of. We can track that and visualize that very granularly. Strategic portfolio management is aware of risk based on assets determined to be implemented. So from the standpoint of portfolio management, they're basically planning in here, and they're able to see vulnerabilities in the planning stages. Again, context across the platform. IT operations management does discovery. We'll show you signs of that when we get into the integration, into the instance demonstration. But discovery is basically providing us the type of adjacency. So we have three types of discovery. We have horizontal discovery, which is what I'm adjacent to, which would be basically your ARP tables, your routing tables. We're determining MAC address and IP address adjacency, and that's what horizontal discovery does at high level. Vertical discovery would be once we know what is near us. What is it? Well, it's a Windows server. It's a Cisco switch. It's a database. It's an endpoint. And in that, we now know what they do. Service mapping that ITOM offers, IT operations management discovery offers, is the business context. Service mapping is what the asset actually does. So we know what the asset is with, who it is residing with on the network segment, what it is and what it does. And in that, we are starting to fuse the ability to see what our assets are to the point where we now know the prioritization of the service mapping to the asset and our ability to remediate based on that knowledge, as well as trust or not. Lastly, second to last, IT service management up here is essentially your front lines. This is your help desk. This is change incident problem. This is our ability to interface with the customers, but also to workflow from the modules where FTEs that are deployed in the field could potentially be tasked in either change incident or problem management from within the security operations module across the platform with the context of the CMDB, with information that has been shared with other portions of the platform, where we can workflow from the security operations module with context of the entire platform into IT service management and then remediate at scale, essentially, where we're doing mean time to remediation much faster in a prioritized method with workflows that we are fully accountable for with a chain of custody and a body of evidence that will withstand scrutiny from executive levels all the way down through auditors, your analysts on your teams, so that we can make better, more informed decisions moving forward. Not just operationally, but also with zero trust. It's based on knowing what you have, what is on the network, who is on the network, what is happening on the network. We're bringing this context into the CMDB, and I'm going to show you once we get into the instance demo here, what that looks like at scale. Okay. I want to talk moving forward here about what I just described, where we're talking about platform-wide context, but we're able to workflow within the modules. A workflow on the screen here, we like to call this Defend Your ATO. This workflow is comprised of, IT operations management, which I was just talking about from the discovery standpoint, and then the vulnerability response module, configuration compliance module, that's security operations. That's what we represent here. That's what I represent in terms of the modules, is SecOps, that we affectionately call it. And then there's integrated risk management. And as it relates to ANA, ATOs, your authorization packages, like I was talking about continuous monitoring, the ability to do vulnerability management, and what we do within our module there, we share that. NIST controls, plethora of different types of frameworks can be shared with integrated risk management, where they can essentially calculate the risk of our environment and work with us on how we're monitoring it and prioritizing our vulnerabilities to remediate. We're doing that based on the context of IT operations management. The ability to essentially maintain an ATO with continuous monitoring on a discovered infrastructure that you've got a lot of visibility into is comprised of these three modules, and customers are using these readily in all environments, DoD, FedCiv, commercial, globally. This basically is occurring now on the platform. Something fascinating that we saw the platform perform when Log4j happened was essentially what's on the screen here. This is a 0-day scenario that played out with several of our customers that were maturely deployed. There are 5 modules of the platform on this screen, and I'll just detail what they do. But we had a major cellular phone carrier essentially detail to us that they followed these processes here. And I'll just describe it at high level. Their CMDB was essentially contextualizing the fact that they had ITSM. That's one module that I talked about, change, incident, and problem, that they're able to do change management with. Vulnerability response and security incident response are part of security operations, SecOps. So there's 2 modules. Software asset management was able to discern what version of software, the Apache software vulnerability, that Log4j had in it, that we may not have potentially been able to scan within vulnerability response for. It might have been too far down into the common platform enumeration of the hosts on their network. So software asset management in the ITAM, IT asset management module, SAM, as it's so affectionately known as, was able to roll up and tell us vulnerabilities we couldn't scan for, that we didn't have incidents on. Very powerful functionality. That's 3 different facets of the platform. Discovery, that's ITOM. We've discussed that. The 5th is integrated risk management with continuous authorization and monitoring and third-party risk management. They're able to see from the third party what products are vulnerable and bubble that up into ServiceNow so that we can risk calculate that. That's 5 modules right there that were deployed on the architecture, where essentially anomalous logs began when Log4j's Apache version started to wreak havoc. And in that, anomalous alerts bubbled up so that event management essentially created incidents in security incident response. That took no configuration because anomalies bubble up within AIOps, and that's essentially what it did. They determined these were security incident responses in nature. And you're seeing names here in the middle of the screen. The power of the security operations module rests in the fact that we integrate with third parties and the tools that are currently deployed in your organizations, API call, potentially. There's a lot of data interactions we can support, but for the most part, it's API calls, and it's an extensive library we support there. Those tools integrated into the security operations modules where vulnerability response was able to scan, as well as reference CVEs, threat intelligence, and so that ultimately we were scanning vulnerabilities and reducing how many incidents we had as change management and patch orchestration and patch management occurred. This scenario right here essentially let that major cellular carrier remediate much faster in real time, where essentially once they had a patch and deployed it, they were employing more scans to continuously watch their vulnerabilities go down. This all took place initially with no log, through HLA with no configuration changes whatsoever. But ultimately, it was managed at scale with major security incident management there, where all the child tickets rolled up into one incident to reduce the noise. So ultimately, this operational capability utilized automation and orchestration, context. It fused teams together. It fused a lot of technical disciplines together, risk calculated it the whole time, and then ultimately remediated faster until a 0-day was no longer in their environment. This is deployed right now in some of our mature customer environments. Polling question number 3. What is your expected implementation time frame, to implement ZTA solutions that are mostly fully automated, advanced in DoD? Targeted was the first one in the DoD model. Advanced was the latter stage, with targeted advanced in the middle. 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10. Actually nobody stated automation or orchestration concerns, which I really found interesting. I'm interested to see this result as well. Three to 5. That's how much time we actually have. And it's going to be here in a blink. 3 years, that is. Interesting. 5 to 10. Okay. I don't think it was mandated that advanced ever happened. It's a desire. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Currently, within the Zero Trust platform, within the ServiceNow platform, we have a Zero Trust access function that can revoke or limit access to the platform based on certain characteristics that we can condition our role-based access on, an ACL based on it. The mechanisms of it are various. It could be from geolocation that you're coming from, IP address that you're coming from, who you are, what your status is as it relates to training potentially. We can condition users trying to access the ServiceNow platform and implement a form of zero trust with zero trust access right now. For zero trust being deployed within your organization or your customer's organization, getting back to the statement I made earlier about integrating your currently deployed systems and third-party vendor tools, all the names on this screen plus a whole lot more are actually integrating with security operations right now. These technical disciplines span CISA, known exploitable vulnerability ingestion. We've got the National Vulnerability Database. I've got 271,000 CVEs in my database right now. CWEs are in. We've got threat intelligence. I'll show you what that looks like when we do lookups within our cases. But we can integrate with firewalls and blocks. I'll show what that looks like. We integrate with SEMs as well. I have a live integration with Splunk that I can perform a search in about 10 seconds on. All of these tools essentially integrate with security operations now, and in that, more do as well. Some of the tools on this screen you probably recognize as your own. We can integrate with these and start to workflow across them. And also what we can do, that context that I talked about with the CMDB, that is what a service graph connector does essentially. It's just a way of saying a connection to the CMDB. So if a vendor has a service graph connector to the CMDB, we're gleaning information, we're gleaning context. We may not necessarily automate or orchestrate, but we're getting the type of context we need from a tool to make better decisions with another tool, or to improve a process, or analytically make sure that we are calculating it properly. So the ability to glean context and provide automation and orchestration, we've got that essentially as what ServiceNow was built to basically do, especially with security operations, is interface what you already have deployed in your environment and make it actionable, workflow it, prioritize it, SLA, but also with no code and low code, we're going to show you essentially how we're doing it in our labs, the ability to essentially do this. So security operations in a very simplistic way on the screen here, we're breaking out the names of these vendors into their technical disciplines. So I always like to say we automate our way into the platform and orchestrate our way to resolution. And in that, you can see the detection at endpoint, XDR, EDR, the correlation, vulnerability and configuration. I touched on that. Some of the tools are vulnerability scanning, configuration compliance scanning, but we also have the ability to do application vulnerability scanning. So from the standpoint of not only continuous diagnostics and mitigation, which we'll touch on the facets of that as well, but also the ability to do DevSecOps. And in that, security is being reported more centrally to security operations, because that's essentially what we want to be in security operations, a centralized case management where we can see all of this context in one place where we can risk base everything and remediate, but we can also take zero trust actions. And how can we do that? So you saw all the names on the screen. You just saw the slide previous where the tools, the names, their technological disciplines, the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, as it relates to NIST 800-207, which is zero trust. Down at the bottom here is a link that they have that details these vendors here. And I ran through this yesterday to make sure we were current for today. Of the 24 they have listed on their website, ServiceNow has integration with 19 of them with API calls. So whether or not we're doing exactly what is required by zero trust in order to respond, we have more than 75% of who the NIST says are venerable vendors to integrate with. We've got over 75% of them currently integrated. I also took the time to basically state service graph connectors so that we not only have integrations, but we're also gleaning context where we can as well. Maybe you see some of your tools on here, but we're integrated with what you see. And we can apply that not just to DoD, but to zero trust as a whole, because again, there's overlap here, plenty of it. Okay. So this is going to be the last slide before I pivot over into the demo. And I'm showing you here control plane, which was policy decision point, data plane, which was policy enforcement point, and try to flesh out basically how we're able to achieve that, at least at high level. Policy enforcement in the middle there can be instantiated by IRM as well, which is on the platform. But these tools can essentially automate and orchestrate responses in the data plane after the control plane has actuated them to basically take action and respond. The integrations I've been talking about is essentially how we're going to do that at the PEP level. And what we have down here on the bottom are some of the things that help us do that. Schedule a patch. We integrate with patch repositories such as SCCM, MECM, BigFix, Tanium. We can also rescan, so for continuous diagnostics and mitigation, as well as in hosts where we could patch them and rescan them if that's the action taken. I'm going to show you what that looks like in the instance, just to show you we're able to do those. And then some of the other functions we're able to do, like block requests and provide context, we can do that as well. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is de-stovepipe into one architecture, the various silos and the technological disciplines that are contained within them, from identities, assets, network, data, the applications. We're trying to put them all in one place and again, get them all aligned where we're fusing the house and our ability to inform ourselves, contextualize our data, our users, our assets, determine our posture from a risk score, risk-based calculation, see it appropriately, analytically, and visibly all the way across to the right personas that need it, executive all the way down to your analysts, inform on it, but ultimately make better, faster decisions so that we can respond better and faster with your current tools. In that, I'm going to pivot over into our instance here and show you some of these automation and orchestration functionalities that I've detailed over there in the PowerPoint. So I'm in an instance, my demo instance, in the security incident response workspace. And what I wanted to show you essentially was some of these features that we can do as it relates to how we orchestrate. On the screen here, I have a case open right now where we have malware being dropped into our environment. And we have a finding here where we have a host IP address that's been determined to be malicious, and that was done through threat intelligence lookup. In that, we were able to determine it was malicious, and the analysts in here are driven by playbooks for what to do next. So we're playbook driven. Some of these are automated. We can definitely do automated or manual, but we're able to basically take concise action in responses here. And blocking was one of them, where we have the ability to block on the global IP block list, block a URL in the web gateways, and essentially submit that and remediate by orchestrating straight from the incident. We have others that we can do as well, where we can integrate with different third-party vendors that I mentioned earlier, Microsoft Defender being one of them. We have the ability to show MITRE attack information. It's actually on the screen here. That's the technique. And MITRE Defend, for what it's worth, will be part of the platform in the roadmap of next year. Threat Intelligence Security Center. This is how we have the ability to do threat intelligence context. Citing search. I have the ability to basically come out into my Splunk integration, like I was saying earlier, and I can do a 8-hour lookup and submit that, where that'll basically kick off. And we also had the ability in there for the citing search to do Tanium as well in here, because again, what is integrated to the platform is at our disposal as it relates to orchestration, if that's the way the workflow determines it. So wanted to show you that there. Obviously, we also have all the contain, eradicate, and recover states within incident handling, but we're after the automation and the orchestrations here, and that was just one example. We could have also isolated hosts with Tanium. We could also isolate hosts with SSH calls that we can configure basically for your switched infrastructures. If we wanted to basically get an IP address and a MAC and find out where that resided and ultimately isolate the host on that interface, we can basically do that as well with SSH within the incidents as well. So in this case here, we're in IT remediation workspace. This is the vulnerability-based type of use case here. I have the ability, once I have remediated, to come in and essentially rescan it automatically from within my interface. My interface in this case is the IT remediation workspace, and the user that I'm emulating here has the ability, if RBAC allows, to pull up and rescan. I'm showing you the cloud, the Crucible lab environment where we have a tenable instance in there that essentially I can kick off a rescan here and determine whether or not we still have vulnerabilities. So we can patch orchestrate as well as remediate with scans. And we can do patch orchestration not only in our module, but we can also do it third party, where we can come into, this is Tenable, or excuse me, this is Tanium here, and schedule the patch and determine which patch we want to use, and then kick it off. One other thing I wanted to show you back here real briefly. So that was a rescan request only after we did a patch. So we can schedule patching within, or if we don't have a third-party vendor doing the patching, instead of a patch repository, we can kick a patch off from within our modules by vulnerability management with security operations, API calling out to SCCM or MECM. and perform it that way. And we can see the patches that reside on there and basically kick those off and patch orchestrate with your repositories. So if we can patch orchestrate and we can rescan, we can create workflows up where if we isolate a host, patch it, and rescan it, we can create workflows to do that as automatedly as your infrastructure would allow. At least keep it above board and accountable. But at the same point in time, technologically, we have the ability to force multiply your infrastructure and your people by using automation to obtain a zero trust stature. And in that, that's what those two can do in our environment there. I wanted to also show what we're working on in our lab as it relates to zero trust and other integrations. I want to show you essentially our ability to, this is low code, no code. This is really fun what we've been working on here. And Ben Prime needs a big nod because he's been leading this effort. It's fascinating. We have the ability with the zero trust records screen that I just showed you here. We can see zero trust wherewithal. We created these zero trust records. We want to see actions, and I'm going to show one more screen here, if we have time for it, where we have a table where we can show a ZTE zero trust effort to allow or deny based on conditions. Show that table hopefully when we get out of here. But what we're able to do is users that have the proper criteria or are not authorized, that do not have the right criteria to get to certain data points, data itself, applications, IAM, if they're not authorized, we need to know that. And in that, if we have a case open where, pardon me here, if we have a case open where we can come in and essentially change its status, we can go from contain to eradicate, or we could go to, in a different incidence, we could go from draft to analysis. What we're basically going to be able to do there is show on a dashboard with no code whatsoever. What we were able to do was essentially show, we should see this today right here, changing state with what I'm doing so that we have the insight into the fact that we are changing the states of some of these ZTE potentials here that we may want to come in, be aware of. That's the seventh pillar in DoD, at least, analytics and visibility. So we're showing that with the dashboard here, but automation and orchestration being pillar 6, that's what I was showing previous. If we're able to see these states, which we just did there, something of a ZTE that is within the matrix that we're working on for our trigger points, our zero trust records, if they're moving, we have visibility into them. So essentially what we just did was change the state with incidents that are of a zero trust nature on users that are part of a matrix we've determined on whether or not they meet the requirements of either being permitted, or denied. So this was put together in just a few hours. This dashboard, these workflows, this visibility and analytics, this is all stemming from the fact that no code, low code development within the platform is something that we do natively. And in the case of ZTA, we're showing the fact that in real time or even over time, we call those temporal or performance analytic derived values, we're able to track and keep it visible to keep zero trust impacts at a minimum. But ultimately, we're making sure that we have full visibility. So we have automation and orchestration, visibility and analytics, but we're also integrated with Active Directory. So we have IAM potential in there. HR could essentially workflow in how the status of an employee has changed. We're trying to get to this state right here by essentially putting the platform in between all the disparate siloed data, users, applications, and essentially get us into a place where we're able to force multiply through integrations visibly the whole time, such that we're bridging your environment in one place where we can perform policy and enforcement. Excuse me. One of these slides I really wanted to show before we wrap up. Here we go. Okay, visibility analytics, automation orchestration, and governance. You just saw what I did on the screen there. This was that exact dashboard. In the interest of time, just didn't have it. But this is basically sitting in my instance. This is a screenshot of what discovery looks like. And this context was basically provided by ITOM plus third-party tools as well. And what you see on the screen there is essentially a sole asset that's highlighting the fact that it has so many security incidents open on it. The vulnerable items would be showing here as well. The associated configuration items, who sits next to it, and then the related services. What's shown in yellow here, we're seeing what ITOM horizontal discovery, vertical discovery, and service mapping looks like in one place, and then we automate and orchestrate that host into remediation. So that's visibility and analytics, the ability to slice and dice our data in the right persona that needs to see it, in the right role, in the right scope, but also our assets and the applicability where we're fusing multiple disciplines and multiple calculation scores in one place, simply because the platform is sitting in policy and enforcement all in one place, as well as within your assets. So, automation and orchestration. I wanted to bring this one up specifically because when I clicked and changed the state of those incidents just a moment ago, I was calling on this table right here, the decision table for whether or not my user from this IP address performing this function on that asset, is it a permit or deny, was determined by this table right here. And that's just one asset or one facet of it. We also have what's called flow designer, workflow designer. And in the workflow studio, we have the ability to use Boolean logic, if then else statements. And that's what you see here. We have a ZTE main test. This is on the back end of the instance I just showed you, the if then else statements of what we're doing as a trigger requires a response. These are the logical conditions and the conditional pickers. These are dragged and dropped over there. This is no code. This is low code. So we're able to basically create workflows off of any data facet found in the platform by either our own information that ServiceNow derived or what we've gleaned from context. All of that is in play here on this drag and drop, no code, low code screen that you see here, until ultimately workflows are built to essentially create responses to these triggers. Also, there's process automation designer too. You can see contain, eradicate, and recover. Contain and eradicate, NIST 800-61. That's in our incident handling. I showed you that. Contain and eradicate are some of the steps within a phishing playbook. So we're showing a different type of workflow and process designer here with process automation designer. But these tools are built into the platform and all modules can utilize them. Lastly, this is the table I was just talking about with the decision table. We can use these in conjunction to essentially create responses to triggers. It's fascinating when you see it in action. That's automation and orchestration. Governance, this is risk workspace. So this is the integrated risk management module. It's heat map, just one of many. We all have a million dashboards, to be completely honest with you, within ServiceNow that are either workspace derived or just informative based on user and role. But essentially, they're calculating risk trends, and they're able to also calculate it against your mission based on the scores that are being gleaned from the context within your space. All of this is feeding to basically make more informed decisions better and faster. So, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, if I've done my job well, this picture and this picture right here should look very different to you, because what 800-207 is trying to achieve is going to require an architecture, planning, staff, goals, alignment, money, but a platform to bring all of these technological disciplines and how they apply into one place where we can make better, more informed decisions faster based on priority in the context of your organization. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to open the floor up to any questions you may have, please. It's okay if you'd like to ask a question you may not think is even relevant. My philosophy is there's no stupid question. The only stupid question is the one that goes unasked. I'd love to know your point of view on anything I've said. If you think I said anything you don't agree with or something you'd like to come over the top with, please do. If not, Sarah, are we at time?
Yep, that's about it. Someone asked if they're going to get the slides. Yes, the slides will be sent out to everybody. All right. So you didn't have anything else,
Absolutely.
Scott?
Uh, let's make sure I drained that deck. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Scott. I'd like to thank all of our participants as well as our speaker for being with us today. We hope the information you received during this webinar has been helpful. If you have any further questions or would like to request more information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again and have a great day.